and steered our collective dreams of seeking an equitable society with opportunities for all. In that spirit, I'm excited to invite my colleague Gajanan Rauta to open our first session of the day, Sustainable Rural Growth, Pathway to Resilient Future. Please come, Gajanan.
Thank you, Gauri, and thank you all of you. A warm welcome to all of you to join the India Rural Colloquy. Dear participants from India and across the globe, we have connected over Zoom, and there are participants from across the globe and from our partners in India. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening to all of you. A very warm welcome to all of you for being here. As you all know, the India Rural Colloquy is a platform to have a conversation and with the development practitioners, policymakers, administrators, and philanthropists on issues and perspectives that matter to rural India. In the last 7 days, we have wonderful discussion on 8 different core areas. It is India at 100 and charting Bharat's efforts. We have discussions around design for a better world, global well-being in the post-industrial society. We have discussions around data science for public system delivery, food and food systems, income and employment, sustainable development, youth and their aspirations, the millennial goal, nutrition security for India, and giving voices to issues of margins and the role of media. The sessions have been very insightful and gave us food for thought to bring action in the work that we do. Today, we are going to have 5 very exciting sessions, starting with Sustainable Rural Growth, Pathways to Resilient Future, and followed by India's Net Zero Resolve, Role of Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar. And then we'll be having a session around the future of civil society. They will have the gender justice for present time and emerging technology for prosperity pathways in rural India. I'm sure all of us will get benefit from all these conversations. Let's begin with the first session, Sustainable Rural Growth, Pathways to Resilient Future. In this session, we are privileged to have with us Sri Sinha, who is the Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, Sri Charanjit Singh, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, Srimati Nita Kejriwal, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, Sri Andrew D. Goodland, Program Leader, Sustainable Development, World Bank, India. As panelists and to take forward the conversation, we have with us Sri M.S. Sriram, who is the Chairperson, Center for Public Policy, Faculty Member, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. I would invite all the panelists to please come onto the dais. Sri N.N. Sinha, Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development. Please have a round of applause for him. I request Sri Charanjit Singh, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development. Srimati Nita Kejriwal, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development. And Sri Andrew D. Goodland, Program Leader, Sustainable Development, World Bank, India. I think there could not be a better panel than this. Mr. N.N. Sinha, who is the Secretary, Rural Development, has more than 3 decades of experience, starting as an IS officer in 1987. He has played pivotal roles in driving many anti-poverty and area development programs, organizing the rural poor, creating sustainable livelihoods and employment opportunities from both at central government and government of Jharkhand. He has been instrumental in drafting the PWD Code of 2012 and played leadership role in Department of IT, PWD, Industry, Mines, etc. in Jharkhand. His leadership in managing the rural development programs like Mahatma Gandhi Narega, PMAY, PMGSY, NRLM is shaping the future prospects for rural India. We are thankful to have him here. Mr. Charanjit Singh, currently serving as the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Rural Development, has also more than 3 decades of experience in varied fields. His contribution towards preservation of ecology, environment is widely appreciated. He has also been instrumental in implementing the land record modernization program in the Government of India. In DAY and RLM, Sir leads the livelihood augmentation efforts, including both farm and non-farm initiatives. He has been instrumental in the current initiative of Mission 25 Million Lakpati initiative, which is one of the very exciting programs under the DAY and RLM. He has also strengthened the intra and interdepartmental convergence, which is reaping fruits to the program. Mrs. Nita Kejriwal is currently serving as the Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Rural Development. She is having more than 25 years of experience in diverse assignment in the Government of India. She has been one of the strongest pillars behind the DAY NRLM program. She has played an important role in the design and implementation of NRLM program from the early stages of the program's inception. Her leadership is unparalleled in making robust institutions of poor, strengthening the institutional design framework for model CLF, gender, food, health, and nutrition and sanitation components, which are very critical for our SSG members. The recent efforts of Village Poverty Reduction Plan is anchored by her, and under her leadership, across all the villages in the country, we are preparing Village Poverty Reduction Plan. Mr. Andrew Goodland is Program Leader for Sustainable Development, covering India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives. In his role, he coordinates and oversees the World Bank's investment and analytical portfolio across the sectors such as agriculture, environment, and natural resource management, energy, transport, ICT, urban development, and so on. Earlier, he has served in Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, Sudan, as the Sustainable Development Program Leader. He was a senior agriculture economist in the World Bank office in Beijing, China. Prior to joining the World Bank Group, he also worked as a senior scientist at the Natural Resource Institute, UK, as an ODI fellow with the Ministry of Agriculture. Mr. Andrew holds a Master's in Business Administration from the University of Cambridge and a Master's in Agriculture Economics from the University of London. To moderate this session, we have Professor Mr. M.S. Sriram, who is a faculty member of IIM Bangalore and is currently the Chairperson of Center for Public Policy. Prior to this, he was with the IIM Ahmedabad. He is a graduate from IRMA and a fellow of IIM Bangalore. He had chaired the expert committee on Kerala Cooperative Bank and was on the External Advisory Committee of the RBI for licensing small finance banks. He was also on the Financial Inclusion Advisory Committee of the RBI and on the expert committee of primary cooperative banks set up by the Reserve Bank of India. Professor Sriram has taught at the Solvay Business School of Business and Economics, SPGN Center for Management in Dubai and Singapore, and delivered sessions in several academic institutions in India. Without any further delay, I once again invite all our panelists and I request Mr. Sriram to take forward the conversation. Looking forward to have a very enlightening conversation today. Over to you, Mr. Sriram. Thank you.
Good morning, and I apologize for not being there personally. I hope we'll be able to manage this hybrid session fairly okay. And not being there obviously has multiple constraints. As far as I'm concerned, I can't see most of you. I don't get a sense of what's happening, but nevertheless, this is the order of the day as of now. So I'll just make a few opening remarks and move on. I think we have, it's very rare that we get 3 people from the same department coming to the same session and talking about diverse issues that they're dealing with. I think we should make best use of them. And of course, Andrew would give some global perspective for us, both from his learnings elsewhere as well as his vision as to the bank's partnership with India. The fundamental thing that has happened and needs to happen over a period of time is for a long time, we have looked at rural as more or less overlapping completely with agriculture. And while there have been multiple programs of self-employment and other initiatives of the government, I don't think we have had a very significant initiative that diversified the rural economy from agricultural allied activities. And I would think that the DAY NRLM, when it started, was an interesting decentralized program which put women at the center and looked at their livelihoods rather than agriculture. I mean, it's, of course, if you are in the rural area, it has to somehow connect to agriculture, but it was not necessarily agriculture. Second is, I also thought that NRLM was one of the most complex programs in the sense that it was central, but at the same time, implemented in a decentralized manner, and therefore there was a lot of customization possible at the state, at the district, and at the village level as well. Any state government intervention or the central government intervention is going to be extremely difficult to have customization, because all schemes by nature, because of their compliance, because of RTI, because of audit, have to be fairly standardized, and it can't be completely at the discretion. But at the same time, we know that the problems are not standardized and they need customized solutions. So I think that's what the challenge is as we go forward. And as we are looking at resilient rural economies, I think that's going to be the biggest issue that will hit us. So in essence, we are moving away from sectoral solutions, which is agriculture, livelihood, livestock-based solutions, to spatial solutions, which is saying, what do we do with the rural areas? How do we manage urbanization? Do we do decentralized urbanization, and so on, right? So I'll stop here, and I would request Mr. Sinha to make his opening remarks. What I would suggest is all the four panelists, let's make a quick 5-minute remark. Let's take some discussions and some questions on board, and wrap up with another 3 to 4 minutes towards the end of the session. Thank you very much, and I will shut up now and ask Mr. Sinha to come on.
Thank you very much, Professor Sriram. I think since he has already outlined the format in which the discussions would take place, so maybe I won't take the dais and then deliver along this kind of thing. So I think the important thing to look at, taking cue from Professor Sriram, is the nature of rural economy. That we should discuss how it is performing. Is it agricultural only, or does it have multiple arms and multiple components which are progressing, and what are the features that we need to take note of while designing solutions for the rural area? In a study that was done by Professor Ramesh Chand, who is also a member of the Niti Aayog, he posited that in 2011-12, about 46% of this share of economy came from the rural areas. Of course, of the agriculture, which was about 17 to 18%, 95% came from the rural areas. 51% of the manufacturing came from the rural areas. 49% of the construction came from the rural areas. 26% of the services came from the rural areas. So in terms of the value added, the contribution of the rural areas was not insignificant to other sectors of economy. However, one would certainly like that more and more diversity should be there in the rural areas. In terms of employment, if you see, 64% of employment came from agriculture, about 9% came from manufacturing, about 11% from construction, and about 40% from services. Another area to note is the per worker productivity. And if we see a ratio of about farm to non-farm productivity, it's about 1:3.88. So roughly the productivity of person in agriculture is 1, then the productivity of people in non-agriculture is about 4. The other critical area to note in this regard is the labor force participation rate in different areas. And that we find that the labor force participation rate, and I mean, it's of course uniform, quite low for most parts of the economy, including the rural areas. If we see women labor force participation rate, it's about 25%. So that's quite low. And if this nation needs to banish poverty, the labor force participation rate for women, for youth need to be much higher. To take an idea of, give an idea of the labor force participation rate for youth in 2024 age group, From a data from CMIE, it's about 44% in the age group of 20 to 24 years, while unemployment rate, I'm sorry. For China, for the age group 16 to 24 years, this was about 18%. So we have to do much more in terms of ensuring that the employment of the youth in the rural areas needs to be much more. The third area which I wish to take up as a prelude to discussions that follow is the issue of rural poverty and its regional distribution. Dr. Sekhar Bonu, who was the Director General of DMEO in the Niti Aayog, he did a wealth ranking of the districts of about 707 districts. And this report has not been published, but there was a personal communication to me. He found out that out of about 203 poorest districts, 74% came from Bihar and Jharkhand. About 47%, 74% of Bihar and Jharkhand districts figure into it. 47% of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh districts figure into it. 28% of EP districts figure into it. Northeastern 60%, Odisha about 67%, West Bengal about 55%. So, and these are predominantly rural districts, and then there is a significant overlap of the tribal dominant districts in the eastern MP, Odisha, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh, and about SC overlapped in the areas of UP, South Bihar, and West Bengal. The last fact which I wish to point out that the share of agriculture in terms of sectors providing employment is very slightly, but on a rising trend, which is not a good thing. There should be more diversity. Now, I will stop because the moderator asked us to spend about 5 minutes, and thereafter other panelists could pick up on it.
Thank you very much, sir. That was bang on time. It's very heartening. Can I get Mr. Charanjit Singh to come in, please?
Okay, thank you very much. Now I will pick up the threads from where our secretary sir left. That is the poverty in certain specific areas. So this has been of concern to us also. And I will try to highlight that how we are trying to address this issue. So first of all, as you all know that the day NRLM has developed a very strong social infrastructure, whether of the SHGs or the VOs or CLFs. Then we are addressing the livelihood issue. So how do we address this livelihood issue? And especially these very poor parts of the country. So I will give you one specific example that how we are trying to address this issue. You must be knowing that there is one Bundelkhand area that encompasses some part of Uttar Pradesh and some part of Madhya Pradesh. And if you have been to that area, then you would know that what type of situation is there. So I am from Madhya Pradesh cadre, so I have seen that area. It's a very difficult area. There's hardly any water. The agriculture is also very tough to do there. There is a rocky terrain is there. So basically, it's a very tough life for these people. So what did we do? We started one producer enterprise or producer company, you may say, on the livelihood sector. We feel that livelihood is the thing we should do in such areas. So we established one company that is called Balani Milk Producer Company in that area on 24th January 2019. So our target was that we will encompass 7 districts and cover 950 villages and 48,000 members. So that was our target. So I'm happy to say that starting from scratch, we have reached up to 41,000 members, and we are collecting around 1 lakh liters of milk per day. And the turnover, that is the cumulative business value up to now is 278 crores. And out of 278 crores, 243 crores has directly gone into the bank accounts of the women members. This whole company is of the women. In fact, it is managed by the board of directors of also of the women. So it's such a strong influence. And we are addressing the whole value chain. We are not addressing only that we are collecting milk and supplying to the milk companies. We are taking care of green fodder production, cattle feed availability, mineral mixture availability, artificial insemination, ration balancing program, clean milk producer production training, infertility camps, CMT test for mastitis, ethno-veterinary practices, etc. So whole thing is being taken care of this area. And I feel that this is the only way that you can address the poverty if you take care of from one step to the last step, that is from the production to the consumer thing. Only then you can address the poverty. And what has been the impact of this? The money is directly going into the bank accounts of the women once in 10 days. So they are getting directly money and they are feeling empowered also. And yesterday I was going through one document sent by our Madhya Pradesh colleague only, that this SHG women are feeling so much empowered. Many of them have become Jila Panchayat Adhyaksh also, that is the chairman of the district committee. Some have become Sarpanch. A large number of them have got elected due to this empowerment. So this is the impact when you address this issue. So, and now we are facilitating their bank linkages also so that they can buy more animals. So I can go on and on. There are so many things I wanted to share, but I will just halt here, and then if there are some more questions, I will address them. Thank you very much.
Professor Sriram, you are on mute.
Sorry. Problems with technology. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Singh. I think there is a continuity from what Mr. Secretary said and what you have indicated. So we'll be able to look at these milestones as we go along. Nita, can we get you on? Nice to see you after a long time.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sriram. Nice to see you too. So I will try to address that issue that you raised about NRLM having to have some kind of a flexibility as well as some kind of a standardization, and how we actually managed to address that. So right from the beginning, there was these two things that are available in NRLM. We have a kind of standardization because we have what we call the basic principles of NRLM, and all the states are expected to follow those basic principles. So the first important thing is that we do have to have the institutions of the rural poor women, and everything else is built on that. So towards all these basic principles and the basic policy decisions that were taken, they are enshrined in what we call the framework for implementation. We very consciously did not have guidelines for NRLM because we only said it is a framework because we needed to provide that flexibility to the states, because NRLM being a very complex program with so many verticals, so many activities under it, and with all the states being at different stages in terms of forming self-help groups or in terms of their requirements, etc., we had to have this flexibility. So there was some kind of a standardization in terms of basic principles as well as the financial norms, etc., that we fixed. But otherwise there was flexibility because the states were asked to prepare their own annual action plans, and in their annual action plan they could decide what activities they want to take, which activities they need to focus upon within the framework of NRLM. And we have a very rigorous system of actually looking at the annual plans of each of the states. So we appraise them very carefully. We have a mission management unit which looks into it. And very carefully, we try to assess whether whatever the state is projecting in their annual action plan, are they really in a position to do that? Do they have the capacity, the manpower, the resources, the skills to be able to do that? And we try to work with the states in order to ensure that the planning is realistic and doable. So that's one issue that I wanted to talk about at the outset. And the second, going to the livelihoods issues, we have started this process that Gajananji was also talking about, the village poverty reduction plan. And these village poverty reduction plan are being prepared by our institutions, primarily the self-help groups and the village organizations. And they are kind of an input to the Gram Panchayat development plan. So this is an effort to make the Gram Panchayat development plan participatory and democratic, as well as to ensure that the demands of the community can come in a very structured manner, and all that they require from the different government programs that can go as an input to the GPDP and to the concerned departments also. And then we also realize that the livelihood activities that the SAG members would want to take are not only those that are supported through any government program or through the Gram Panchayat, but also some that they may try to do with their own resources, which they may raise themselves or through the credit that they raise from the banks, etc. So in order to collect all this information, now we have prepared a system whereby comprehensive village livelihood planning can be done. So each household's livelihood planning can be done, and then we go and try to see how that plan can be supported through skill building, through making financial resources accessible to take it to the concerned line department, which can then provide those support. So I'll halt here and then we'll take it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita. That's how the government looks at it, Andrew. How do you look at it from our side? And also, if you could give us a little bit of an outside-in perspective of your experience with other locations as well.
Thank you, Professor, and good morning to everyone. It's a real great pleasure for me to be here representing the World Bank. We've been a partner with the government of India for many, many years now on the National Livelihoods Program, and it's something which we're extremely proud of. Just to frame some of my comments, a bit of my own personal history. I actually started my career in rural development. My first ever job was as a volunteer in Southeast Pakistan. So I started in South Asia, working in the trenches, as it were, and on the front line in a rural livelihood program. But then, since then, as they said in my bio, I've sort of traveled the world, and now I've come full circle back to South Asia. And some of my reflections are based on that separation and returning to discuss rural livelihoods again 30 years on. This was 30 years ago that I started my career. Seems rather a long time. So some observations just on that time gap. What first is obvious is the enormous scaling up of interventions supporting rural livelihoods across South Asia and of course in India. The numbers of self-help groups, of women members, of capital mobilized. That's just absolutely staggering. And so it's been, testimony to the government and the communities and the NGOs who are engaged to how this has been achieved. It's an incredible story. And related to that, of course, the impacts and the fact that these days we're less talking about basic needs, food security, extreme poverty, and we're now having a different sort of conversation around the sort of next generation of rural economic needs. But thirdly, also obviously, really, I mean, the world is a very different place now to what it was 30 years ago in terms of, you know, connectivity, digital development, people's access to technology, and some of the more pressures on which we all face. You know, climate, of course, is probably foremost amongst that. So because of that shift, I mean, the questions that we're discussing now is probably a different set of questions than we were discussing 30 years ago. And of course, we constantly need to ask these questions. And I think we are, I mean, from the World Bank side, are now very interested in having a discussion, because our decade-long support to the a National Rural Livelihoods mission is due to come to a close. This generation is due to come to a close in the next 12 months or so. So we want to have that discussion now about what does the future hold in terms of supporting rural livelihoods, rural economies throughout India. And as I said, so the priorities have shifted for the Indian policy and decision makers as well. It's no longer just about producing sufficient food. And it's about, you know, nutrition security. It's no longer about basic services. It's delivering a more sophisticated package of services. A lot of the basic infrastructure which wasn't in place is now in place. So you have the connectivity, but how do you develop the markets? So the questions are changing, and of course, how do we combat the threat of climate change? How do we adapt? How do we create these sustainable jobs within rural economies? So, I mean, just some reflections, partly on what I've heard from the panel this morning, which is very interesting. I mean, it's clear to me that the strength of the rural economy is so vital for the overall prosperity of India. And I think we've seen this in the through COVID in the last couple of years, where we've seen almost a re-ruralization with the rural economy providing a sort of safety net to many the urban people who lost jobs. It has that ability to absorb labor. My second reflection, and this is kind of just maybe to stimulate a bit of discussion and to on what a professor was saying in his initial comments. I mean, to me, actually, I'm you know, let me pin my colors to the mast. I'm actually an agriculture economist by training. I mean, agriculture has played this vital role, and I think it will continue to. So even though I understand that rural economies are not only about agriculture, and I also understand that the contribution of agriculture will decline and needs to decline for the Indian economy to go through a structural transformation. There's a contradiction, but it may sound like a contradiction here. I think for that transition to proceed and for agriculture and employment in agriculture to decline, and just to say, I mean, I think in India, the employment in agriculture is around sort of 42% or something. I mean, in China, it's 25%. Even in Bangladesh, it's lower than India. It's 37, 38%, I believe. So this sort of shift needs to happen. So how do we support that? Now, this is where the sort of contradiction is, because I feel like you need to actually continue to support agriculture, though maybe in different ways. And the reason for doing that is that, you know, the research I've been involved in my past in Ethiopia, in East Africa, in China, have shown that one of the drivers of rural economic growth and diversification is growth in the agriculture sector. Because the agriculture sector, you have, when agriculture sectors grow, it has a lot of spin-offs for the non-farm rural economy. And of course, it helps to create a demand within rural markets. And whether it's services and goods around the agriculture sector, or whether it's jobs which are being developed from greater prosperity within rural areas, the agriculture sector is central to this. But of course, I think for India, the nature of support to the agriculture sector needs to decline. And when Secretary, when you say that the productivity in agriculture is so much lower than it is in non-farm rural jobs, my response to that is yes, that's true, because the majority of agriculture in India is still stuck in cereal production, rice, wheat, and low-value goods. But if you looked at the productivity in higher value agriculture, the gap would be much smaller. So there's a diversification challenge, and the whole policy framework in the country needs to shift from one which is still predominantly pushing the production of cereals to sort of creating incentives for diversification for higher value agriculture, for private sector to come into the agriculture as a space to drive growth and productivity. But having said that, of course, I mean, I think there needs to be this transformation away from agriculture and into services and manufacturing. Just a couple of things to mention before I finish. The land question is fundamental, and I think that without the continued sort of fragmentation of land, it presents a major policy challenge for India. Just to mention on digital development, I mean, I believe we're just at the tip of the iceberg here in terms of what digital technologies can offer the rural space. I think a lot of the infrastructure is in place, the accessibility is there, but now it's shifting to applications. I don't know what they are, but there's a large pool of extremely bright young entrepreneurs who can come in and exploit that. I mean, from a final comment, because the professor asked me, what's the role of the World Bank in this? I mean, of course, we continue to be a partner of the Indian government on the livelihoods agenda. I think in our strategy, we're increasingly switching our focus from central to state, partly because we realize that India simply doesn't have one solution. I mean, all solutions need to be tailored to local circumstances. I mean, what you do in Bihar is going to be very different to what you do in Kerala, et cetera, and that involves, increasingly working at state level and below state level. Climate is critical to every intervention which the World Bank now does. And I mean, one question back to the audience here and to the panelists is, there's this tremendous amount of social capital which you've built up over the years through the livelihood program. How can this, I mean, what's the role of this very powerful structures in terms of responding to the climate crisis? Clearly, the sort of integration of agriculture and rural needs to be there. But the World Bank now, we take we look at sort of systems, and I think when we're talking about spatial approaches, it's looking at agriculture, food, rural economy systems, and understanding the interlinkages. A private sector and the partners that we work with are also expanding. It's private sector, it's NGOs, it's community institutions. So less of a focus purely on the public sector. And finally, what the bank brings to the table is knowledge, global knowledge. And, you know, for instance, in the agriculture policy space, I mean, how can we really help? Well, what we want to do is really help shift the policy agenda to helping the country to diversify its approach to rural economies. Let me stop there. Sorry, I probably went on a bit too long, Professor.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. I think we've had a very good opening to start with. Mr. Sinha started by identifying the issues, poverty, labor force participation, etc., etc. From there, Mr. Singh looked at reducing vulnerability, diversification of livelihoods, moving towards empowerment, possibly moving towards political participation, and active representation in the political process as well. Nita brought in the complexity and the challenges of program implementation, and Andrew, of course, brought in one more dimension, which I think we had all ignored, that is diversification within agriculture. I guess one of the things that we all face, particularly in the rural context, and if it's a heavy dependence on monocropping, particularly cereal oriented, is the seasonality and therefore the vulnerability of the rural populace. I think if we were to grade the way forward, starting with vulnerability reduction, the diversification of livelihoods, employment, entrepreneurship, empowerment, political empowerment, I guess that seems to be the route forward. And I think NRLM has significantly reduced the basic level of household vulnerability because of regular cash flows and regular diversification of livelihoods. I guess there are some participants, Anish, who may want to make an interjection here. I was told that we had Mr. Jayesh Bhatia. Would we like to bring that in before we open up some more questions?
Mr. Sriram, we can have it a little later.
Okay, then let's get back and see if there are any questions for Mr. Sinha, Mr. Singh, or Nita, or Andrew. Andrew, to just keep, continuing your this thing, is there any significant examples that we can learn from elsewhere that has managed this transition from vulnerability towards diversification livelihoods in a graded manner elsewhere? Moving beyond agriculture as well, yeah.
Okay, thank you. In a way, India is the leader in terms of rural livelihoods, and I think there's a lot of lessons within the country which you may know better. I mean, I got a little anecdote. I mean, the example you gave was fantastic. There's a former a World Bank president who came to India maybe 20 years ago, and he got taken to a rural community where he saw a very positive example of I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was some sort of a group activity where women had come together, and the whole package was there, and these women had benefited greatly. But instead of being pleased, he was furious, and the reason he was mad was he said, "Well, if you know how to do it, why is it not happening in every village?" So don't just show me one isolated. And I think it's a good question to sort of within India itself to really understand what are the keys of these many success stories which are out there, and then think about what are the keys for replication of that. Professor, just on a vulnerability, I mean, this is around risk management, and the way I like to think about risk management is thinking about layers of risk. Now, I think a lot of the bottom layer of how you manage risk is how you sort of absorb the risk yourself. How do you build these social institutions where when there is an external shock, a household can be resilient through it, through the strength of community, through the strength of community actions. And I think, I mean, not knowing India particularly well, but what I hear of all the work done under the National Livelihoods Mission is that a lot of that is in place. But then there are types of shocks which are beyond the capacity of the community to absorb. And here's where we and there may be, sorry, let me start at the other extreme, go to the other extreme, where you get the catastrophic events which are impossible for a community to withstand. And there you need some sort of social protection, some state-driven interventions to provide a relief. But then in the middle of this, and this is where I think the focus should be, is then, for the middle layer of risk, which is probably beyond the capacity of the local community, but doesn't quite justify a government stepping in, is this sort of risk transfer area. And this is where insurance comes in. And I sat on a similar panel to this a few months ago discussing the India's agriculture insurance program, which is both an enormous expense to the government, but also currently not really delivering those kind of risk management universally across the country. And I think this is a real area where India actually can learn from other countries about how to make that sort of risk transfer a mechanism more efficient, more accessible, and ultimately supporting the full range of risk management tools at the disposal of local communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew. I have a small question for Mr. Sinha. One of the things, the solution for rural growth and income diversification is not necessarily in the rural areas. So how does the government plan to address the issue of convergence between migration, mobility, urban management, and improving the rural infrastructure and diversification livelihoods? Is there some sort of a growth plan that there is a thinking between departments? How do these silos within the government work?
I think you very rightly mentioned that the solution of all the rural problems does not entirely lie within the domain of the rural livelihood programs. There are many areas that we need to do work on. And to take the first one on which this department has been active for a long period of time is the work on the rural connectivity. So under the Prime Minister Gram Sadak Yojana, almost about 175,000 villages have been connected. And I was looking at the data of the total connectivity which have been secured through one or the other form of the connectivity activities by the state governments or the central governments. And the number runs into several lakhs. I don't remember the exact number, but it was somewhere around 3.5 lakhs. And if you juxtapose this number with the total number of villages, so that's somewhere around 6.5 lakhs or so. And many of these are small habitations. So in that sense, most of the areas with significant populations have been connected. There are some and for which the government is planning. So, but a very large and significant proportion of the communities have been connected, and these have a lot of impact on multiple areas, not only livelihood, economy, growth, employment, but also on access to social services, access to health services, livelihood diversification. There are series of studies which have been done through various partners, which prove that the rural connectivity program is indeed a very significant program for the rural growth. The other area which I wish to point out is the rural cluster growth, which was taken up through a wide variety of programs, starting with the ex-president Mr. Kalam's, Dr. Kalam's program of Pura, and thereafter Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Urban Mission. And there about 300 such clusters were identified, and the idea was that we will, through a comprehensive program of urban facility development, economic development, ensure that those become the hubs for economic, social, and urban growth. The linkage with the urban should not be ignored, and there are studies which point out that for every 10% growth in consumer spending in the urban areas, there is about 5%, or the elasticity of the urban to rural growth is about 0.5. So it is quite dependent on how we are able to couple these two growths through programs that link the rural value generation to the urban consumers, and a variety of programs also under the National Rural Livelihood Mission are indeed aiming to do that. The value chain strategies for actions which have been taken through the producer enterprises under the NRLM or NRLP or NRETP programs, as well as under the 10,000 FPOs program of the government, and now increasingly under the cooperative development programs of the government. They indeed aim to mobilize the rural productivity and rural value chains to the consumers, and thereby capture larger value in the rural areas. We should also look at the issues of how do we ensure that the post-harvest activities are done better. Still, depending on the source that you consult, you will find that about 20 to 40% post-harvest losses are there. And in order for ensuring more value in the rural areas, not only you should bring down the losses in this sector, but also ensure that they are processed and thereby the values increase. To give you one example, the production of the onions in this country is about 250 lakh or about 25 million tons. The consumption is about 150 lakh tons or about 15 million tons. Yet we find the price rises taking place. Why? Because we are not able to store onions to ensure that the prices remain within the band, and government doesn't have to ensure the moderation of price rise through imports and things like that. So post-harvest is one critical area where a lot of work need to be done. Agro-based processing, etc., remain areas where we need to do a lot. I also find that there is a great degree of potential with the new electronic formats that are coming up. And one particular intervention I'm quite hopeful about is the recent intervention of the government of one open network for digital commerce. I think at this moment, the rural producers are at a disadvantage because they are not part of the supply chain. They are unable to conduct commerce. So I am hopeful that once this kind of a network is available and the rural connectivity being improved under various programs for network improvement through BharatNet and other means, PM1E, etc. The rural producers would also be in a good position to be able to market their produce throughout the country, and at least in the areas where they can market their produce significantly. We also need to discover a lot of diversity in terms of the produce that is there within the country. And I think we need a lot of rural champions of such kind of produce. I'm told that there are haldi or in certain parts of Meghalaya where the curcumin content is quite high. So are we marketing those kind of products? And I think if we are indeed identifying those products and able to market them well, also focus on their production on scale so that they are able to market them. This would also bring a lot of prosperity and income and growth and employment into the rural areas. So I'll stop at this. Maybe I could make a comment also on the areas the moderator permits about the opportunities of rural investment. I'm not sure if moderator wants me to continue.
Please continue and finish your point, Mr. Singh. Why should we stop you? But as briefly as possible, that would be nice.
Thank you. So I was looking at a number of the cropping intensity, and cropping intensity, if you see in the country, is about 150%. Now, and the range lies from about 110% to about 190%. But I mean, leave aside certain parts in the country, our belief is that if we are able to do a good amount of water and soil conservation and management, as was hinted by Andrew, we should be in a position to take 2 crops. It's just that we have not been diligent enough in this area of harnessing the agricultural potential that we have through multiplicity of systems, some amount of mechanization, some amount of cropping planning, some amount of weather forecasting. So with a lot of these activities and investments in the area of agriculture, especially precision agriculture and precision irrigation, we should be in a position to do a lot. Also, there is a lot of potential in terms of greenhouse-based agriculture, whereby the productivity could indeed be enhanced very significantly. We are told that this kind of agriculture, the productivity could indeed rise by 10x. So there are avenues of productivity growth in agriculture, and that probably chimes in with the suggestion given by Andrew that in order for the rural diversification to take place, we also need to identify those levers for the agricultural growth, which have not been tapped very significantly to a large extent in the rural areas. So I would stop at this. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's evident that there are lots of solutions from within, but we still need to look at the cross-sectoral collaboration in a much more effective manner, I suppose. I have a question for Mrs. Singh, which has come from one of the audience. How is it? How is the Lakpati Yojana going to assure economic prosperity? That is one. And I'd like to add one more small supplementary of my own. You were talking about the daring initiative and entire breed improvement and other things that you mentioned from Madhya Pradesh. How is the current NRLM-based intervention different from Operation Flood, which was a very centrally, implemented scheme where dairying was brought into India under 4 phases of Operation Flood? Is this supplementing it? Is it, filling up the patches that Operation Flood had left? Is it different? How is it panning out? Thanks, Mr. Singh.
Okay, thank you very much. I think these two questions are very much interrelated only. This regarding Mission Lakpati, our objective is that we want to provide sustainable livelihoods of our rural poor households. So what can be sustainable? So we thought that to motivate the states so that they know a target needs to be achieved. So if each household earns around 8 to 10,000 rupees per month, we feel that they will be able to earn around 1 lakh rupees per year. So every household should earn that much amount of money. So that is the Mission Lakpati. And regarding that, we thought we need to provide additional livelihoods to our rural households. So as there was some discussion was going on already, we want to provide multiple livelihoods to our households. So they can't be dependent on single livelihood, especially during this climate change scenario, etc. Because one livelihood can get impacted and then it will impact them very badly. So we want to provide them multiple livelihoods. This can be agriculture also, then livestock also, then there can be fishery also, honeybee also, or anti-api also. So many livelihoods can be taken care of. So that's our second objective. And the next thing you mentioned about this Operation Flood, I just gave you one example of the milk producer company. So we are intervening in many value chain. So these value chain can be in the agriculture sector also. This can be in the honeybee sector also. This can be regarding backyard poultry also. This can be regarding fishery also. So it depends upon the situation in that particular area. Like few days back only, we sanctioned one honeybee value chain. So we are trying to address the whole value chain for honeybee also. We want that not only honeybee should be collected, all the associated things like bee pollen is there, bee wax is there. So propolis is there, bee venom is there. So all these things should be taken care of because honey is only one part. So if we take care of all the things, so that will be win-win situation for everybody. And for that also, what type of crop should be there? So what types of interventions are required? So we want to address different value chains as per the specific situation in that area. I just want to add one more point here. So that is we feel that the thing can't be taken care of by the Ministry of Rural Development only. We need the whole of the government approach. That is the mandate of our Honorable Prime Minister also, that all the ministries should jointly address the issue of poverty. So, but I feel that not only the whole of the government, the whole of the society approach should be there. So why not the civil society organization? Why not the private sector? If we all combine together, I feel that only then this humongous challenge can be taken care of. And I am happy to share that we are already working in this direction. We have signed one MOU with RC also. So that is a conglomeration of around 85 NGOs. They are working with us on integrated farming clusters. There also we are trying to address these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Nita, there's one question for you before I get back to other issues with the audience. In your village poverty reduction program, how are you going to measure the broad impact? How are you going to say that that intervention has borne fruit? Is there some framework that you're using? That's one question that's there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Sriram. So at the moment, actually, what we are able to do is to prepare the village poverty reduction plan and submit it so that it gets incorporated in the GPDP. What we have also done is we have digitized the whole process of preparation of VPRP. But the next step is what we are working on. So you're aware that there is a e-Gram Swaraj portal for the GPDP. So now we are trying to integrate our application with the GPDP so that all the demands that the community makes, whatever is accepted into the GPDP, that can be, it can be digitally transmitted from our application to the e-Gram Swaraj portal. And then we can also see which of the demands of the community have been accepted, and further also track through some connectivity with the other line departments whether these demands are being actually fulfilled also. That is one way of doing. The other is, at least if we know which of our demands are being accepted in the GPDP or by the other line departments, at least through some community pressures, etc., we can at least track. So that part is something that we are working on. So with this, digitization of this whole process, there is a huge potential. We can link it not only with e-Gram Swaraj portal, but also maybe with the different applications that other line departments may be having. So this is actually work in progress. And I think over the next couple of years, we should be able to see much better results. As of now, we are trying to have a lot of integration with the Ministry of Panchayati Raj to make sure that we work together in this whole process, and also to try to bring in all the other concerned line departments also. We've actually set up a task force with the Ministry of Panchayati Raj to see, work on all the ways of integration to make this whole process of GPDP really participatory and effective.
Thanks,
Ram, can I add to what my colleague said?
Sure.
So I think the village poverty reduction plan at this moment is both a signal to the community and maybe a charter of livelihood agenda for the community, which it negotiates with the Panchayati Raj system, which it negotiates with the state. The livelihood aspirations, typically how it had been is that it has been more of a personal kind of aspiration, which was articulated with the functionaries of the states or banks or such agencies. But village poverty reduction plan gives a framework for the articulation of the community's livelihood aspirations, broken by components of livelihood activities that it would like to take up, and the whole ecosystem that should be generated around that. So at this moment, while the convergence platforms have been set up, as has been explained by Nita, I think we in this year we are looking at if the community's articulation of the livelihood aspiration is how is it negotiated with the panchayats, how is it negotiated with the state, with the departments, with the civil societies. We should be happy, but ultimate test would be how much of it are we able to realize. But maybe as Nita mentioned, in a few years time we should be at that stage, but at this stage we should be happy if communities feels and insist with the Gram Panchayats and other PRI tiers or with MPs or with MLAs that this is our livelihood aspiration, and now please create this ecosystem to ensure that this livelihood agenda is achieved.
Thank you. May I request Mr. Bhaskar from Syngenta to make an intervention, please? We'll get a little bit of a private sector view also on how they look at this issue. Mr. Bhaskar?
Hi, thank you very much. As a foundation, we've been here working in agriculture and trying to improve the income of the farmers through livelihood interventions. And the flagship program has been creating agri-entrepreneurs in each village. And so far, we have reached almost 10,000 entrepreneurs, hyper local entrepreneurs in each village. We are almost reaching 10 lakh farmers in 18 states. And we partner with the SRLMs in 4 states, and it's been very, very great partnership with the SRLMs. In fact, I think Andrew alluded to it earlier about the scale. How can we replicate the Bundelkhand Milk Producer Company initiative in multiple value chains? Can we, because we don't have the luxury of time, how can we do, say, 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 such large rural enterprises, collectives in the next 2 to 3 years? It's a challenging thing, but can we explore PPPs to do this? Again, I think Charanjit, you alluded to that again, saying that we want all the actors, civil society and the private sector to do. But can we create a strong PPP frameworks to really look at such large-scale intervention? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bhaskar. Can I get Swapnil in, please? Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, it was not Swapnil, it is Dharmendra. My question was more related with about the fact that, and it's not to a particular person, but in general to the panel. Mr. Sinha highlighted the lower youth participation rate as compared to the criticality of it for the rural growth. So my question is to especially how NRLM thinks about engaging with youth through policy and backing up with the investments. And the second is that do we see that the current institutional design, the current institutional architecture of NRLM, which is much more SHGs and plus, will the same architecture will be good enough to engage with youth, or there would be some modifications that would be required? Some new alternatives have to be thought about. Yeah. Thank you.
So so can I reply to this?
Please go. Please go.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I appreciate the earlier query by Mr. Bhaskar that we need to upscale on a large scale. I fully appreciate your sentiment because time is a constant and we need to move ahead very fast. So really, it's a good idea. And we need to... No, I will just give you one more example that as I mentioned about this Balini Milk Producer Company, so we are going for 1 or 2 lighthouse projects in the state. And we expect the states to take it up further in different modes. They can take partnership from whether private sector or their state schemes or from any other source. So I'm happy to say that we sanctioned only 1 project in Uttar Pradesh. 5 projects have been sanctioned by the state government on its own. So that is the impact. We want that there should be something we can show to the states that becomes the pathway for the rest of the things to move ahead. And really, we need to be innovative also, so that we can attract different source of fundings also. So I really appreciate and that we need to work on that. And the second thing I want to say here is that as we want to achieve sustainable income for every household in the rural area, so that is our ultimate aim. And we No, I mentioned about the 25 million livelihoods in the next 3 years, but ultimately we want to reach all the households as soon as possible. So our target is that the cluster level federations, which are a very strong structure of the day NRLM system, we want that all these livelihood activities should be anchored at the CLF level, so that if the community itself becomes so much empowered, so that they can take these things forward. So that is our ultimate aim. And we are establishing certain model cluster level federations in this direction. So ultimately the community will take over and the role of the government will be minimum. And I feel that when the community is empowered, rest of the things can be taken care. Thank you.
Professor, can I come in on private sector?
Sure. Andrew, now that the mic is in your hand, I have a supplementary also. So please take that as well so that you can comprehensively address the issue. One is about water climate change, that of course you're going to address. There's also one question about should we have a land policy given that there is a fragmentation? Should we look at a policy level intervention at the level of the state to administer land and how to manage land, agricultural land?
Okay, thank you. So a couple of big questions. On the private sector, just a couple of reflections. I think there's when I have traveled around India, I hear quite a heavy emphasis on supporting entrepreneurs, startups, and some sort of innovation. I think that's excellent, and I think the question is, and when you talk about PPPs, I don't think you quite mean PPPs in the sort of traditional sense, but really the question is, what is the role of the public sector to support entrepreneurship? And I think that's a very valid question. I mean, there's incubators and developing the infrastructure to support that. Maybe some challenge enterprise funds, but one thing I think which sometimes gets lost in this enthusiasm for startups and entrepreneurs is, I think the bigger challenge for India is actually scaling up existing small business, and actually I think that's maybe where in the shorter run you'll see the growth. I mean, how do you take a small firm with just a few employees or 1 or 2 employees to turn them into a company with 50 or 100 employees? So that's the challenge, and I don't think we can forget these existing companies and always be looking for the next sort of silver bullet in terms of entrepreneurs. I'm not saying supporting entrepreneurs is not important, but let's not forget as scale up. On the question of land, I mean, clearly this is a difficult, sensitive issue, and one for which a very careful consideration needs to be given. Having said that, I don't think it's something which India can shy away from, because I suspect in a lot of areas that it's having an impact on productivity. And indeed, I was in Kerala a couple of months ago. I mean, there are agriculture plots there which are being abandoned basically because they're too small for the smallholder farmer to realize an income. Now, there may be so land policy is one side of it, whether some consolidation can be incentivized through changing policy framework. I mentioned before I worked in China. I mean, they take a more of a kind of top-down approach to that, and I'm sure that wouldn't be appropriate in India. So it's a question of building the incentives for that consolidation to take place. But also looking at how you make better use of small plots. You don't need a very big plot under greenhouse cultivation to be a very profitable farmer. You need a lot of investment, but actually land is not necessarily a constraining factor. So there's different ways of coming at it. But what I would say is that I think the status quo where we'll continue to see fragmentation is not a sustainable approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Sinha, I've received one more question, which possibly falls into your zone. This is to do with institutional structures. As we are moving to the next stage, from NRLM possibly to the next big intervention, what would be an appropriate institutional structure? Would the SHG and the cluster federations be still relevant? Second is, this is my own supplementary, these tired community-based institutions, we have had a good experience in the past, but over a period of time, they tend to wither away, as you have seen in the cooperative structure. It was very good in the 60s, 70s, and then it started withering away. Is there a issue with that? So these are the two questions. What is the next institutional structure can be managed within this structure? Second is the structure stable enough?
Very important questions. I think we haven't explored the full potential of the CLFs. In my opinion, the role of state as promoting agencies for the entire NRLM structure, the women networks, is because there have not been enough of the community itself mobilizing and addressing these functions. We feel that with cluster level federations catering to about 2,000 families of about 25-30 villages is a significant enough size whereby not only they could ensure that the network institutions are working in a democratic and transparent manner, but also anchor livelihood activities, livelihood functionaries. They could incubate the livelihood enterprises and groups out of it and could provide necessary support. On their own, SHG may not have enough significant size, or the village organization may not have sufficient size, but CLFs do have the benefit of size. They do have the benefit of negotiations with significant levers of the administrative and political system. So I guess the role of the CLFs have not been fully realized. And at this moment, one of our big agendas is how do we ensure that CLFs from now onwards are able to take and assume the mantle that they should have naturally assumed. This question about the tiered structure, whether they would become stale and whether they would be in a position to continue with the same vigor or not, it's a very important question. I think part of the reason, I guess, the cooperative systems failed to was that new agenda for it was not set since 70 onwards. Maybe something in the 80s, but thereafter it was always on a downward spiral, and only now we are seeing cooperatives being discussed, thought about their agendas that they could pursue being taken up and enhanced and broadened. The role of these different institutions in the women network will need to be continuously enhanced, and those who assume the mantle of nurturing the women networks in future will need to keep this in mind. previously the social mobilization was at the top of the agenda. Thereafter, the financial inclusion came at the top of the agenda. Now we are looking at the livelihood development. But I mean, I guess after some time, livelihood development, equities, social development issues would assume the center stage. And thereafter, I mean, the interaction of the community structures, women networks with the politico-economic bureaucratic system is what should be on part of their agenda, on their agenda and their plate, which they should be addressing. And if we keep moving to newer areas that improve the livelihood of the poorer members of the rural community, I guess even in next 20 years, we should be still grappling with these parts of the agenda.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, but nevertheless, let me take one last question for Nita. Nita, the question is it only about poverty reduction, or are we also going to do something about nutritional security? How does that figure into the intervention? That's one question. If you can answer that then.
It's not only about income poverty. See, we realize that poverty is multidimensional and we have to address all its issues. So social development issues are also a very important agenda for NRLM. And over the last 3-4 years, we've been trying to work a lot on this. This includes nutrition-related issues, sanitation, health-related issues, gender-related issues. So in all these areas, we have been coming up with very good models. We've developed the resource persons, the training modules. A lot of trainings have been done. And in almost every state, in some areas, these interventions have been initiated. So, as you know, in under NRLM, we kind of go in a phased manner, and particularly, considering a lot of constraints in terms of manpower that the states keep facing, we are a little slow in this area of work, but very steadily we're trying to take this up further. I think all the states realize that these are very important areas of work, and unless we are able to address all these aspects, we cannot really talk about proper women's empowerment, or we cannot talk about proper quality of life. So it's definitely on the agenda for NRLM, Professor Sriram.
Just 4 minutes left. So what I'll do is I've just noted down the key words that came out of this discussion, which essentially means that we can write a doctoral thesis out of this session if we have the patience. We started with recognizing poverty. We looked at labor force participation. We looked at diversification of livelihoods, diversification of agriculture. We then moved and looked at employment, entrepreneurship, empowerment, including political empowerment and political participation. Then we have dealt with issues pertaining to water, land reforms, institutional interventions, value chains, both decentralized value chains and centralized value chains. We have looked at the relationship between the vertical of rural development, agriculture, and other departments, and looking at how convergence can happen. We have looked at the institutional architecture and how the institutional architectures are moving. We have looked at public-private partnerships, the role of markets, and finally, we looked at nutrition. I mean, in a 1.5 hour time, this is a very, very, very wide canvas to cover. I think we have done a fairly interesting job of covering this, but only question is, how do we wrap this up into a nice new good framework and sort of put it in an abstract and say that this is what these diverse views all converge into. I think the issue of any intervention is very much about convergence. And I hope we will move towards convergence with the minute to spare for the organizers to thank the participants. It has been lovely interacting with you. And I'm extremely thankful for my panelists for having sort of given so much of insight in such a limited time, sticking very much to the limits, but at the same time, not holding your punches back. And wherever there was elaboration needed, it was done. Thank you very much.